Then moving on to the national level, we have a first bullet points saying guidelines for incentives from government to develop carbon efficient practices and technologies. This is a very, very general statement, so it's hardly, it's difficult to disagree with. It wasn't subject in the larger group at the end to much discussion, so there is not a lot of context on that point. And if anyone from the group, we had actually 2 subgroups were done in Spanish, so if anyone from the group actually, when we open the floor later, right, would like to substantiate on that point, I think that would be, that could be appropriate. And then we were asking for application of transparency rules at country level, demanding disclosure of emissions. So reflecting at the international level, there is a general call for much more transparency, and we feel that that would be able to drive actually a lot of innovation and best practice development. Then moving on to our own commitment as a sector, or sectors, depending on how you see it. The first one is to measure and report greenhouse gas emissions, and that bears on the whole transparency issue that runs right through from the international level, national level, and for ourselves. And I think that that's one key message coming from the group, that we need to increase transparency dramatically. Then the other commitment is to improve the carbon efficiency of the sector, and we were juggling with the concept coming from the Low Carbon Leaders Initiative yesterday of carbon distance as a way of looking at it, noting how trade and moving goods and people are actually creating value and growth. So it's of value to society, but we want to invest our carbon as a society in the most efficient way of doing it, so we get more movement and more economic activity out of as little carbon as possible. This is a place where obviously it would be natural to have some numbers, but again, that's where we definitely ran into that this in day-to-day, this is running in these subsectors, and trying to find something that would reach across, though, would show to be impossible, at least within the context of the group and the time we had available. And then the last point is to include human behavior, focusing our efforts to reduce greenhouse gases. And I think that's an important point, that it came up from several sides in the group, because it's acknowledging that the business models and the technologies we can that we can produce or operate will have the possibility to perform at a certain efficiency level. But the human factoring in operating it, whether we're talking about private transportation or commercial transportation of goods, is actually quite significant in terms of realizing that potential. So this is a commitment to work more systematically on, which is often an overseen factor. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. To his right, you have Dennis Pamlin, who is the coordinator for the technology and communications sector. You might recognize him from yesterday morning, so he's not wearing a tie now. He's the director of the Low Carbon Leaders Program, and is a senior advisor to global initiatives, as well as a senior associate at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences.
Thanks. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you, not only to the group, but also to being allowed to be here. Last year at the World Business Summit, the big polluters, of course, were all represented. You know, if you look at the world, you have food, you have transport, and you have buildings, basically, as the big polluters. And those has been discussed as reducing their emissions. ICT is, of course, important also, as it has its emissions, but it's really an enabler. And that was the first reflection of the group was, are we really in the right room? For how long should we sit by ourselves and discuss all these excellent ideas we have for smart buildings, integrated solar solutions, more information around the food system, and smart transportation, and sometimes not even transportation at all, because you can have remote working and other things. So we hope that it's the last time we only have a sector approach, and from now on we will also meet around service approaches. And especially if we call for governments to have a service approach, it would be very appropriate if we have that as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing was that we must send a very clear message that we're moving away from incremental improvements now to transformative. We should not just focus on what we have today and how that can be done in a slightly better way, but really looking at the service being provided and how can that be done in a lot better way. And focus on acceleration. We are very keen to look at these sort of linear models. We need to look at accelerated uptake. And that's difficult. As was mentioned yesterday, it's one of my favorite examples also. The models we usually use, like McKinsey. They thought that we're going to have 1 million mobile phones by the year 2000. Was 100 million, factor 100. And I think we have a lot of these opportunities now with ICT, also with accelerated uptake. The last sort of general thing that I want to touch upon is, I don't know how to put this in a humble way, but I think a lot of people in the ICT industry feels that it's a little bit of need of education for policymakers, because the potential and the technologies available are so amazing. In a few years, we will have 50 billion connected devices. What does that mean for transparency, reporting, real-time information, etc.? We're not planning for that. People are still thinking that you're going to crunch these numbers by yourself, you're going to sit there and collect those things. But that's not going to happen. So, and also the sort of dematerialization of the economy. How fast can that go? We used to think that the best thing we can do to save the forest is to plant a few extra trees. Well, we have e-ink now, and we have other things that we don't even need the thing we've been using the forest for, we don't need it for anymore. So maybe the biggest prize for the forest savers should be for Amazon.com and other things. And we don't really think like that. They're really innovative people. And they meet needs in very new ways. And Amazon.com was not set up to save forest or save climate. It was to provide people with reading whenever they want. And also be inspired as a group. And that comes back a little bit also maybe to this organization and how we sit here. I don't think we will do this for very much longer. For people working with IT, Wiki approaches, sitting a few people within a room and thinking we are the ones inventing this. Why? We can invite anyone on this planet to participate in these things. And increasingly also people that are not can afford to participate in meetings like this, their voice can be heard. Because at this meeting, unfortunately, most of the people here are very rich. That means that some are very humble and sort of bring that in, but they can participate. IT can allow these people to be here. So that's the last thing. And now what we then wanted for Cancun to help deliver the sector commitments. A roadmap where ICT sector is recognized, and maybe not just ICT sector, but enabling technologies, biotech and others could be there as well, with concrete milestones and energy efficiency codes. Second one, acknowledge, and this is, I think it's been said a number of times, and maybe that should be up in the chapeau really clearly, acknowledge companies as solution providers and encourage transformative solutions that deliver reductions of the magnitude that is needed. It was actually a small discussion there to that on the risk of high carbon lock-in, that we are doing things that might reduce emission a little bit, but actually locks us into a system that don't take us the whole way. Specific policy instrument that countries can put in place. National and regional carbon reduction plans needs to recognize the role of ICT in achieving those objectives. Of course, we also recognize that we can call on Cancun to do whatever we want, but unless national governments is actually integrating this perspective, not much will happen. Second, on policy instruments, help to enable other economic sectors to use and accelerate the use of technology that can deliver transformative solutions. This was also part of when national governments are inviting people to talk about building sectors, they might not invite all the new stakeholders in this. Energy sector similar, smaller solar and system providers are not always included in this when legislation is done. And then the commitment of the sector. The sector, which is one of the fastest growing on the planet, wants to maintain its carbon footprint at 2% of the total, which is really ambitious because it's growing so fast. Further, we estimate, and this is maybe the more interesting thing also, that the industry can enable the delivery of 7.6 gigaton reductions elsewhere in the economy by 2020. And with a supportive framework, thereby becoming climate positive. And with the possibility of a significantly higher impact with a strong focus on transformative solutions. So, and the last one is also that we're going to focus on life cycle assessment and improvement on the supply chain so as more correctly calculate their own footprint as well as a positive contribution. And this was only a few weeks ago, GESI, the Global E-Sustainability Initiative, was actually launching a report on how you calculate, or a framework for how you calculate the positive impacts. So that was all for us. Only one voice, but that's not going to last for long. The IT is going to spread its more widely.
Thank you very much. Lastly, we have to my right, we have Cesar Ulysses Trevino, who is the coordinator for the Building, Constructions, and Materials sector. He's the founding president of the Mexican Green Building Council. He's also the former treasury and secretary for the World Green Building Council.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. Well, thanks a lot for all our work group members. We had a diversity of interests from product manufacturers, professional charters, developers, NGOs, international public agencies, building and construction practitioners. So I think we pretty much got in the room different views, different perspectives on the challenges posed for sustainable building and construction. So thank you all again. And since we didn't have the time to go together in detail, hope we're capturing all of your thoughts and main concerns. Well, one thing that is important to mention here is that we have seen that issues and commitments addressed for the building sector are common. And you'll see in our proposal, in our definitions, commitments regarding to effective reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, technology deployment, the need for financial mechanisms, and the need of sustained economic growth. Concepts such as supply chain and life cycle assessments are very important in our sector, and unfortunately not very well regarded or addressed so far. And another issue that was raised was about social equity and improved quality of life, which is bottom line for us. We again feel very important that we should continue this horizontal dialogue and the cross-sector communication. We saw a lot of commonalities in our goals and strategies for solution. So in our case, talking and looking at the results from the energy, the ICT, transportation, land use is very important for city planning, community development. So we'll start with our agreements on what can Cancun deliver to help our sector. And the first one, very important, recognize that community planning and building industry as a top priority for achieving sustainable future. This is very plain and simple. We are probably the single sector with the most cost-effective mitigation measures. So there's a lot of potential in the building and construction sector. That's coming from findings from the IPCC and many other international agencies. We as a sector, you should know, we consume about 12% of potable water in the world, about 50% electricity in developed countries. 30% of solid waste comes out of building demolition or scrap. And overall, 30% of greenhouse gas emissions comes from the whole building lifespan, from building extraction, building construction, and its operational phase. The second issue for Cancun to assist in our goals will be to enable market-based, legislation-driven financial mechanisms that support sustainable building, comprising new and existing projects that are both energy efficient and have a reduced total carbon footprint. So this is very important. I think the focus has been mostly on new buildings, but what do we do with the 98 existing building stock that they are wasting energy every day? So we're putting a lot of policies or efforts in place for new construction,